Continued from the previous file, question answers of Pygmalion. Page 31. Though there is a hint that their married life will not be a bed of roses. Further, Shaw's arguments in the epilogue bring the course of action in the play on the plane of anti-romance or realism. Quote, the rest of the story need not be shown in action, and indeed would really need telling if our imaginations were not so enfeebled by the ready-made and reach-me-downs of the wreck shop, in which romance keeps its stock of, quote, happy ending, unquote, to misfit all stories. Now the history of Eliza Doolittle, though called a romance because of the transformation it records, seem exceedingly improbable is common enough. Unquote. The above quote aptly shows that the several elements of the play can be appreciated in the light of the conventions of romance, though it is an anti-romance. According to S.E. Ward, the intentional irony Shaw called the play Pygmalion a romance, it is evident that Shaw has taken resort to romance for adding new dimension to teacher-taught relationship, love and marriage, basically in order to bring those issues in the light of realism. Pygmalion is not a romance as it would rightly have been called so if Higgins and Eliza would have fallen in love and married. It is a problem play, and the problem goes much deeper than the love story told in the play. Every teacher who sets out to fight ignorance is in a similar position with regard to his pupils as Higgins was with regard to Eliza. He leads them towards a new way of life and is compelled to live at its threshold to go only themselves. Question 4. Give a brief note on the plot structure of Shaw's Pygmalion. Or how has Shaw designed his play Pygmalion for developing the dramatic effect? Answer. The success of a narrative work like drama or novel to a great extent depends on its plot structure. A literary artist designs the plot of the story with a view to achieving his or her own goal of creating an art. In the play Pygmalion, Shaw has attempted to dramatize the Greek myth of Pygmalion. In that myth, Pygmalion, a famous sculptor, created an ivory statue of a lovely woman named Galatea. The statue was so beautiful that its creator fell in love with it. At the festival, Pygmalion requested Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, to transform the statue into a living woman. To his astonishment, Pygmalion found that his prayer has been granted, and he proceeds to marry the statue-turned-woman Galatea. In Shaw's Pygmalion, Professor Higgins has been projected as Grecian Pygmalion, who creates his own Galatea by transforming Eliza, an ignorant flower girl, into a duchess by developing new speech and manner in her with the active help of Pickering and Mrs. Pierce. She is thus Higgins's creation, the new duchess-like lady. Shaw deviates from the original myth of Pygmalion in the point that his Pygmalion does not fall in love with her and she marries a young boy. Page 32. Freddie. This is a typical twist Shaw gives to his play by twisting what is expected as evidenced by the choice of the title. The present play has been framed in 5-act structure commonly found in English drama from the Renaissance to the Romantic period. In the 5 acts, he has attempted to dramatize his own version of myth. We notice that there are no subdivisions of the acts into scenes. Each act shows the stages of growth of Eliza. In Act 1, Professor Higgins is seen to efficiently detect the speech pattern of Eliza, the flower girl, and he expresses an intention of converting her into a well-spoken lady, worthy to be presented among the upper-class people. Act 2 deals with the beginning of Higgins's experiment of Eliza's development in the residence-cum-laboratory of Higgins. In the next act, Eliza undergoes a trial to show how far she has acquired the knowledge catered to her by Higgins and Pickering. In this part, Mrs. Higgins, Professor Higgins's mother, observes Eliza's interaction with her guests and informs her son that Eliza is not yet fit for presentation. In the fourth act, Higgins' success as an experimenter in phonetics is presented, and he is seen in a happy mood. However, in the last part of the act, Eliza is found raising her voice against her creator for ignoring her future and emotional aspects. In the last act, Eliza is found to have resorted at the house of Mrs. Higgins and severs her relationship with Higgins and Pickering and joins Freddie with a hope of future happiness. The minute scrutiny of the pattern of the play will reveal contrasts leading to symmetry. The first act takes place at Covent Garden, while the second one in Higgins's laboratory in Wimpole Street. The remaining actions move from Mrs. Higgins's drawing room in Chelsea to the laboratory and finally again to Mrs. Higgins's room. By placing the action of the play in different locales, Shaw has attempted to relate the work in phonetics to the larger world. Not only the locales but also people from different sections of society have been brought into play to provide us a broad picture of this society. Another purpose is to engage people belonging to different strata of life in the process of transformation which Shaw sincerely wants. Professor Higgins and Pickering, who are really educated and gentlemen, are interested in Eliza, who belongs to the working class. The contrast between these characters is dissolved when Eliza wins the bet for them. However, this apparent equality is deceptive because immediately after her successful presentation at the party, she realizes the faults of her learning. This learning will not help her earn her livelihood, and therefore she segregates herself from her creator and wishes to go with Freddie. To her, Higgins is a bully, while Freddie is a softy and a weakling. This contrast and parallel in the presentation of characters base the play on a solid ground for putting forward the Shavian outlook through paradox. Page 33. Two mothers, Mrs. Higgins and Mrs. Eynsford Hill, have been portrayed as contrastive ones. Mrs. Eynsford Hill is basically soft and lenient person who does not rebuke her daughter Clara for behaving rudely with her or anybody. She seems to be helpless to play her role as a mother. On the other hand, Mrs. Higgins, who lives independently in a separate house, is critical of the activities and manners of her son. Her authoritative domination over her son, leading to mother-son fixation, can be assumed to be the main reason of his remaining bachelor. It is she who guides her son in taking the pragmatic decision to allow Eliza to marry Freddie. Contrast is even shown in between brother and sister. Clara is rude while Freddie is soft and pleasant. Even the housekeeper, Mrs. Pierce, opposes both Higgins and Pickering because of the unconventional way of looking at social relations. She does not like the way Higgins and Pickering attempt to behave with Eliza. It is evident that Shaw's own idea, quote, "no conflict, no drama," unquote, has got concrete shape in his own creation. This conflict is both apparent and inherent, and is in structure and texture. This dramatic contrast remains dominant in the whole gamut of the play and even in the epilogue part. To conclude, the play has been woven in such a way so that a new myth with the Shavian agenda can be placed in a better dramatic manner. Question 5. Shaw's play Pygmalion is a play about phonetics. Discuss. Or, Shaw has expressed his concern about English speech in his play Pygmalion. Illustrate. Answer. Phonetics, as we know, is a scientific study of the speech sounds. As a subject, it talks about the pronunciation of the speeches and makes an attempt to establish what is the standard or received pronunciation of a language. Shaw was greatly concerned about the standard of English speech and propagated his ideas about it in different lectures. His Pygmalion is a drama rotating round the phonetics of English and its spoken variety. Pygmalion can be claimed to be a play about phonetics, as Shaw explicitly claimed in its preface, quote, "The English have no respect for their language and will not teach their children to speak it. They spell it so abominably that no man can teach himself what it sounds like. It is impossible for an Englishman to open his mouth without making some other Englishman hate or despise him." Unquote. Shaw thus lays emphasis on to produce the language, in bracket here English, bracket close, properly. Professor Higgins, who has been, as Shaw stated, modeled after the great English phonetician Henry Swift, can teach English people, even the lower class people, how to speak clearly and accurately. In Act 1, we see that Higgins is competent to place all the bystanders in the portico of St. Paul's Church simply on the basis of their accents. Page 34. He informed Colonel Pickering, quote, "You can spot an Irishman or Yorkshireman by his tongue. I can place any man within 6 miles, I can place him within 2 miles in London." Unquote. With a great zeal and fervor, he takes up the challenge to teach phonetics of English. The people show that an Englishman can acquire his language in a better way and also can produce it perfectly and appropriately in different situations. He has developed the hatred towards bad English or Cockney English. He denounces Eliza, in bracket Beth, bracket closed, for her speech. Quote, "A woman who utters such depressing and disgusting sounds has no right to be anywhere, no right to live." Unquote. He further reminds her of the fact that she is, quote, "a human being with a soul, and the divine gift of articulate speech that your native language is the language of Shakespeare and Milton and the Bible. The play centers mainly around the academic and professional life of Professor Higgins. It exhibits how he successfully teaches Eliza, a flower girl, in order to convert her into a duchess or a lady endowed with standard English speech and manners of speaking. He is well aware of his capability as a teacher of phonetics, as evidenced by his saying, quote, "I shall make a duchess of this draggle-tailed guttersnip," unquote. Eliza, with her impeccable action, acquired in a few months' teaching, thus pass off as a duchess. This action adequately affirms Shaw's firm idea that speech is one way of dividing class from class and emphasizing class distinction. It is through Higgins's successful attempt that Shaw conveys his attitude to English speech and English speech teaching procedures so far as the teaching of native speakers is concerned. Higgins has shown his capability to bridge the gulf prevalent in society as identified by speech distinction. This relates here. He is well aware of his capability as a teacher of phonetics, as evidenced by his saying, quote, "I shall make a duchess of this draggle-tailed guttersnipe," unquote. Eliza, with her impeccable action acquired in a few months' teaching, thus passes off as a duchess. This action adequately affirms Shaw's firm idea that speech is one way of dividing class from class and emphasizing class distinction. It is through Higgins's successful attempt that Shaw conveys his attitude to English speech and English speech teaching procedures so far as the teaching of native speaker is concerned. Higgins has shown his capability to bridge the gulf prevalent in society as identified by speech distinction. This relates here in the case of Alfred Doolittle. Quote, "If we were to take this man in hand for 3 months, he could choose a seat in a cabinet and a popular pulp in Wales," unquote. Furthermore, Higgins' out-and-out preoccupation with English phonetics is evidenced by the statement which he makes before his mother to let her know the value of this subject. Quote, "But you have no idea how frightfully interesting it is to take a human being and change her into a quite different human being by creating a new speech for her," unquote. To conclude, Shaw has tried to explore the result of English phonetics teaching in relation to social class system and uplift of the lower class and the development of English speech. Question 6. How has Shaw handled the theme of class distinction, snobbery and middle class morality in his play Pygmalion? Or class consciousness leads to snobbery. Discuss this statement with reference to Shaw's Pygmalion. Answer. As a Fabian thinker, Shaw has projected his view on social class distinction and its malign effect on human mind in his drama Pygmalion. Class distinction gives birth to snobbery, which Shaw vehemently attacks in the present play. Page 35. In Act 1, Eliza raises a protest against snobbery by refusing to be cowed down by her social superiors, as she utters, quote, "I am a good girl, I am," unquote. Mrs. Eynsford Hill, who belongs to a middle-class family, is snobbishly curious to know how a flower girl belonging to a lower class can come to know her son's name. Eliza possesses a typical brand of snobbery. She rides in a taxi to show to everyone her quality. At Higgins's house, she asks Mrs. Pierce to tell him that she has come in a taxi. Once it is finalized that she will stay at Professor Higgins's house, she expresses her wish to cut off her relation with other flower girls. Immediately, Higgins reprimands her. Quote, "You shouldn't cut your old friends now that you have risen in the world. That's what we call snobbery," unquote. Mrs. Pierce, who is a homekeeper of a person belonging to an educated society, develops snobbery and does not like the people of lower stratum. She is so contemptuous of Eliza and her father because of their belonging to working class. She tells Higgins about Eliza, quote, "She is quite common girl, sir, very common indeed," unquote. When Eliza says to him, quote, "Don't be silly," unquote, Mrs. Pierce rebukes her. Mrs. Pierce is consciously maintaining her status. She even does not respond to the person below her rank, as evidenced by her disdainful behavior towards Eliza's father. To maintain the class distinction in spite of the financial crisis poses a challenge to those like the Eynsford Hills. They have to endure a shabby existence in a gentle poverty. Mrs. Hill exhibits the, quote, "manners and habits that disqualify a fine lady from earning her a fine lady's income," unquote. Freddie and Clara cannot get jobs befitting for their middle-class youth. They cannot take up jobs below their social class. In a similar fashion, Eliza faces a larger problem of education, especially liberal education. It cannot yield a result which will enable the learner to work in future for earning his or her livelihood. Eliza has been provided education how to speak like a duchess instead of vocational education with which she can earn her livelihood. After her successful presentation in the party, she feels horrified thinking of her present incapability to go back to her work of selling flowers on the pavement. Shaw has shown the vacuity in the traditional education system. Mrs. Higgins is pragmatic enough to locate the problem and so favors Elizabeth when she takes a decision to go with Freddie. It is observed that Eliza and Freddie are in a mood to marry, but do not have any concrete plan how to live their conjugal life. In spite of that, Shaw favors their union from the realistic point of view instead of Eliza's stay with Higgins. Another point, as shown by Shaw, is Professor Higgins's attitude to the working class people as reflected through his treatment of Eliza. Eliza, who demands respect as a human being from person of all ranks. Continued in the next file.